ever have that experience where you think of something innocuous and you don't realize you're stepping into something? That was me just right there. Of course, pineapple goes on pizza. I mean, come on, let's be real for a moment. Anyways, good morning, church. My name is Michael. If we haven't met, my name is Michael, and I get to serve as pastor right here at Centerpoint. Welcome. We're glad that you are here. I have the privilege as pastor to do all kinds of different things. There's about 31 different things that fall under that umbrella term. And one of them that I really enjoy is weddings. And it's wedding season. So far this month, I've done 2 weddings. And people ask, well, how'd the wedding go? Well, they left married, so it worked. We didn't lose anybody along the way. It was a success. When I gather for the weddings, in fact, I could put it like this. The premarital counseling before the wedding is really my favorite because then I get to speak with this couple that's getting ready to get married. We get to navigate a bunch of ups and downs and things to expect and how do we talk to each other, things of that nature. I really enjoy that. And it's there that I see most often what we see a lot of when it comes to marriages, when it comes to relationship. Think about the last romantic movie, romantic comedy, something like that, that you've seen. Typically, the flow of the plot, it goes something like this. The guy and the girl, they meet each other in some sort of a funny way. They have goofy habits. If it's a Hallmark movie, she's visiting from the big city and he has a red sweater. I'm just throwing it out there, all right? They try to navigate getting together, and somewhere along the line, something happens and they separate. There's a misunderstanding. There's a breakdown in communication. They separate. But don't worry, because at the end of the movie, they get back together. And often, at the end of the movie, they'll either hint at a coming wedding or the movie will actually end with them getting married. Isn't that sweet? How often in movies, in stories, and all of these things is the end of the movie is the wedding? It's as if you make it to the wedding, you've made it. You're set. Don't need to worry about it anymore. Now that we're married, everything will mellow out. There won't be any issues. We won't get upset with each other anymore. We can just ride off into the sunset together. Anybody have a marriage like that? The reality is often far, far different. The wedding is not the end of the adventure. In fact, it is much more like the beginning. Now, when I get to officiate weddings, since I've done a few of them, and since I have a different perspective being up here and kind of coordinating everything, I get to see things that most people don't. Most people don't notice the things that I notice. Some of them, they sound trivial, but they're actually really big. For example, at one of the weddings I did, I can't tell you because I'm embarrassed to tell you how much time I spent trying to figure out how do I hold a microphone and my notes and rings at the same time. It can't be done. And so we had to navigate a solution to that. At one of the weddings that I've done, I'm up here. We've got the bride and the groom. It's a beautiful thing. I ask for the rings. You ask the best man for the rings, and then you can pray over them, things like that. And the rings were in this envelope. And remember, I've got my notes, my handout for him. And he plops that envelope right on there, says, there you go. I said, that's sweet. Can you open it and put it in my hand? Because I can't, what am I supposed to do? I can't do anything. Another thing that I see that I'm willing to wager no one else did. At every wedding I've ever done, when I'm standing up here with the groom, when we're waiting for the bride to come down, most people see that groom, usually they're standing something like this, with a big old smile. Knees might be shaking just a little bit, but we're getting through it together. But usually they see him standing like this. They don't realize he's not empty-handed. In fact, he's carrying a big old burden right in front of him. Another thing that I see that most people don't is when the bride comes down. Now, typically, she has a bouquet, something like that, maybe 2 hands on it as she's walking down the aisle. But what people don't see is not only is she carrying that bouquet of flowers, she's carrying a big old box. And what is that box? That box is the box that we all carry It is our hopes and our dreams. These are the aspirations. These are the things that we've thought of early in life and throughout life. And when we look at, well, this is what life's going to look like, we already have ideas of what life's going to look like. We have our hopes and our dreams. And hopes and dreams aren't bad. And they often reflect maybe how we grew up, what we saw in our own house, something like that. You see, someone might grow up with lots of pets in the home, and so they want to get their own pet. Yoshi is what this is. If you can't tell, I have too many kids, and so they're all kind of kid-themed. So they might have this idea, I want my house full of pets. That's so much fun. It's so lively. Someone else might say, well, we always garden, so I want to garden when we grow up. I want to have space outside my house in that picket fence so that I can do my gardening. Somebody might have grown up with a dad who had a hot rod, and so they decide, the only way to really enjoy life, it's in the car. You have to have the car. Sometimes we learn life is more than cars. Ain't that the truth? Sometimes maybe you grew up playing traveling ball, and so you just kind of assume, well, most of our days are going to be spent traveling, because when we start having kids, they're going to grow up playing ball in much the same way. Sometimes we might have ideas on what our spouse should or shouldn't wear to bed. That's a whole different conversation. We'll have ideas on what to do with the money. And guess what, by the way, this is monopoly money. I'm a preacher. That's all I can afford. Anyways, not only do we have ideas about how much money we're going to make, but don't worry. We tell ourselves and our future spouse, I know exactly what to do with it. You don't have to worry about it one bit. Somebody might have the dream that says, my husband, my wife, they're going to make enough money to where I just won't have to worry about it. And someone else might say, think of their future husband and wife, we're going to make money together, but I'm the investment guru. I know exactly how that thing should be done. And so we figure, I'm going to manage the money. And of course, my future spouse will agree, I know what I'm doing. And so they won't question any of it. Correct? And so we come into our marriages with our hopes for Yoshis and our hopes for hot rods and our hopes for space to garden and things like that. And when we walk down the aisle to our wedding, we take our big old box of hopes and dreams with us. And then you can even picture when that couple is exchanging rings, when they put the ring on each other's finger, they're taking their big old box and they're saying, here you go. This is the life that I want. Make it happen. And when that happens, what we feel as hopes and dreams to our spouse, they turn into expectations and demands. I expect to have a yard big enough for the garden that I want. And if you don't give that to me, we're going to have problems. I expect to have a house full of animals. Well, I'm allergic to a bunch of animals. You'll be all right. Get over it. I expect to have those things. I expect to have sole control over the money. I know what's going on. My dad was a banker. I can do anything with it. I'll figure it out. You just stay out of the way, and I'll let you know how it goes. I expect to have the 2.4 kids that the average American has. No clue how that's even possible, but anyways. And someone else might say, well, I grew up in a family of 6. I want a large family. Or someone might say, I'm an only child. Maybe I want one child. Maybe I don't want any. When we walk down the aisle towards each other and we hand each other our boxes, they don't get interpreted as hopes and dreams. Instead, they become expectations. They become demands. You see, all relationships have conflict. As we are handing each other our boxes of hopes and dreams, our boxes of demands and expectations, all relationships have conflict. Think about this. If two people are married, if they're completely sold out to the marriage, if they're completely sold out to living life together, what are the odds that every value and preference they have is going to match identically with their spouse? Precisely 0. Because of that, all relationships have conflict. In fact, I've gotten to the point when I talk with folks about conflict, especially in these premarital sessions, things like that, sometimes I'll hear the phrase and it'll go like this, oh, we don't need to worry about that. We never argue about anything. And I'm thinking, really? Well, that must be sweet. You've got something figured out that I don't. Anyways, when I hear people say, well, we just never have conflict, something like that, I tend to think one of two things, and sometimes if I'm feeling ornery, I'll voice them. The first one that I think is, well, they must just be hiding it. They must be lying. They must be taking the arguments that they have and sweeping them under a rug, and let's hope nobody notices. Because especially if we're at church, and especially if we're talking to the pastor, we can't let them know that we argue over who does the dishes. That doesn't sound spiritual at all. And so instead, we just never argue. Now, my preference is I hope this is the case, because the other option that comes to mind is that they've just simply given up. They've given up on the adventure of marriage. They've given up on a life of pursuing each other and of pursuing all that God has for them. And so what that giving up often looks like is it might just simply look like, well, we've settled into sitting on the couch all afternoon and evening watching Netflix. We've settled into she has her things that I do, I have my things that I do, and every now and then we see each other in the hallway. Something like that. In fact, I remember speaking with couples that are close to retirement age and just asking, what are your plans for retirement? What are you going to do with your time? What are you going to do? What are your aspirations? And she tells me all of hers and they're exciting, and he tells me all of his and they're exciting. And I just ask a simple question. I'm a simple guy. That's the only type of questions I know. I ask, did you notice that in all your plans, neither one of you mentioned the other person? I've got my things I'm going to do. She has hers. When people say we never have conflict, that's either a sign that they're hiding or that they've given up, that they've grown apathetic. And that is all kinds of sad. And so how do we handle conflict when it arises? How do we handle this idea that says, hey, I'd love to take our family on a vacation. Growing up, we always went to the beach, and I want to share that with my kids. And then your husband or your wife says, oh, I'd love to go on a vacation as well. Growing up, we always went to the mountains. Beautiful view. And I'd love to share that with our kids. And so then we're trying to decide, are we going to the beach or are we going to the mountains? And depending on what the economy's doing, we might just be going to Walmart, but that's a different conversation entirely. But for the sake of this, how do we navigate this conflict as it arises? So often, the way couples navigate conflict is they turn it into a transaction. They turn it into something like this. Well, last time we did what you wanted. This time we have to do what I want. Last time you got to pick what's for dinner. Today I get to pick what's for dinner. Last time you got to pick whatever it happens to be. And we start bargaining with each other. And bargaining in a marriage, it does not lead to intimacy. It does not lead to ministry. Instead, it leads to manipulation. Anytime a couple approaches their conflict in this transactional, this bargaining nature, it becomes a negotiation. And the thing about negotiations is the best negotiator always wins every single time. The one who's able to negotiate well, who's able to handle those tougher conversations well, they always win. It always goes the way that they want. And then that other spouse, the husband and the wife, afterwards are thinking, I knew what I wanted to say. I knew why I wanted to do what I wanted us to do, but for some reason I just couldn't get it out. They're left feeling unheard. They're left feeling as if they don't have a say in the marriage. And so often, not so often, but I mean 100% of the time, if one person in the marriage wins, that means the marriage loses. If one person wins, the marriage loses. Because a marriage is not built on bargaining. Marriage is not built on transactions. Marriage is not built on negotiations. It's not built on any of these things. We walk into marriage with our hopes and our dreams. And these hopes and dreams aren't bad. Having pets isn't bad. Having a garden isn't bad. Some of our hopes and dreams aren't even tangible items. That might be more of a mindset, healthy mindsets that come from our status of being image bearers of Christ. You see, we might have this hope and this dream of being respected in our marriage or of being admired in our marriage. When it comes to admiration, this is so important for husbands and for wives. We need to let our spouses know we admire them. We believe in them. We think they can do it. You can make it, whatever it happens to be. And the reason why we need our spouses to remind us of this so often is because we spend the majority of our time thinking there's no way we can make it. I'm not good enough. I won't make enough money. I'm not a good enough parent. I'm not whatever enough. Your spouse needs to hear you think or hear you say that you believe in them. They need that support. Maybe we have this hope and dream of being prioritized within this other person's life. That as they're going down their schedule of things to do, things to give themselves to, and trips to take, and people to be with, that we're going to be right at the top. Maybe we have this picture and this idea, this hope and dream that says we're going to live life in such a way that my spouse is going to be proud of me. You know, it's interesting. Years ago, right here, several years ago, there was a middle-aged woman, I won't give away her age, but advanced in years, and she came up, and she was just talking to me. She wanted to share a story, and she introed her story with something like this: Pastor Michael, I did something this week that's going to make you proud of me. And I just interjected, wasn't thinking or anything, just kind of came out of my mouth. Wait. I'm already proud of you. But what do you got? I didn't think a thing of it again. And to be honest with you, I can't remember the story, but it was probably good. Months later, 4, 5, 6 months later, she came up to me again. And she says, Pastor Michael, do you remember when? And to be honest with you, I couldn't. Had to think about it for a moment. Do you remember when we had that conversation? She said, that was the first time someone's told me that they're proud of me. That little interjection meant the world to this lady. In your relationships, tell your spouses you're proud of them. If you have children, be they in the home, be they grown and gone, tell them you're proud of them. So many of us go through life not having heard that. Our hopes and dreams, our hope to be respected, to be admired, to be prioritized, to have someone be proud of what we're doing and be proud of who we are. We take our hopes and dreams and we give them to this person. And we say, I need you to fulfill this, whatever the this is. And often, well, for one, that's impossible to begin with because they can't fulfill our hopes and our dreams. But two, so often we give them our box without even telling them what's in it. We hope they can read our mind and figure out what we're excited about, what we need, and then they can just do all the things that we want them to do without them even realizing it. It doesn't work that way at all. And so we find ourselves being married for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, whatever it happens to be. We find ourselves with our unfulfilled hopes and dreams. We find ourselves just kind of stewing, saying, this isn't what I wanted out of marriage. He's not doing what I want him to do. She's not doing what I want her to do. What can I do with this? How do we respond when we feel unfulfilled? Well, there's a few different options that come to mind that I see quite frequently. One, we might just simply ignore it. We might say, I don't have hopes and dreams. I'm going to take all those things I want. I'm going to shove them under a rug. I'm going to pretend they're not even there. But when we do that, when we pretend that we don't have these hopes and dreams in our marriage, we become just that. We become pretenders. And intimacy isn't built by pretending to be something we're not. Intimacy isn't built by two people pretending that they don't have hopes and dreams that they want to share with each other. And so possibly one option is we might just ignore them. Another option is we might distract ourselves. We give ourselves to our work. We give ourselves to our kids. We give ourselves to volunteering at our kids' school, whatever that happens to be. We just try to do anything we can to take our mind off the fact that what I really wanted to do in life was play the guitar, whatever it looks like. But then, whatever we use to fill that void, sooner or later, it's not going to measure up. This is why, by the way, there's a spike in the divorce rate. If you look at divorce rate, be it how many people, what percentage of marriages end in divorce over years, there's a spike at a few different areas. And one of them is around year 20 to 22, kind of within that window. With the idea being, this marriage was built on the kids. And right around year 20 to 22, the kids start moving out. And now we have nothing to talk about. If we spend our lives distracting ourselves, it just doesn't work. Now, if we use option 1 or option 2, more often than not, they lead to the same destination, which is number 3. We find someone else. I had this desire to be admired. And if my spouse isn't admiring me, I'm not going to live life forever without that feeling of admiration. I'm going to go find it. I'm going to find that new coworker that laughs at my jokes. I'm going to find that neighbor that says they're impressed with how well I keep the yard or with how well I keep the car. I'm going to find that admiration in some other place so that I can meet that void that's within me. And what folks don't often realize, when they find that someone else is not there because they're just looking for a person that they can serve. They're not there because they're a selfless person that's just looking for someone they can admire. They're doing the same thing of trying to fill an unfulfilled void within their lives. And they've tried ignoring it. They've tried distracting themselves, and it doesn't work. Now they're going to try finding someone else. All relationships have conflict. How do we navigate this conflict? What does it look like to navigate conflict well? What is at the root of conflict? Well, the root of conflict is something called pride. Now, hang on for just a moment. Earlier, I said, tell everybody around you you're proud of them, and pride leads to conflict. Well, this is two different types, two different understandings of the word. When you tell someone you're proud of them, you're building them up. You're focused on them. An unbiblical and unhealthy, a toxic pride isn't focused on that other person. It's focused on 3 people, and that those 3 people have something in common. They're me, myself, and I. This unholy pride that says, I'm going to get mine, and don't you get in my way. That's what leads to all kinds of conflict, fights with each other, so on and so forth. All relationships have conflict, every single one of them. And we even see this in this beautiful song, this beautiful celebration of love that we've been walking through called the Song of Songs. Some of your Bibles might call it the Song of Solomon. It's the exact same book. As we've navigated through this, we spent time a couple weeks ago looking at what it is to become the person that the person you're looking for is looking for. Or if you're already married, it's stated slightly different. Become the person that your spouse is dreaming of. We talked about how important it is to pursue each other. Last week, we talked about God's heart, God's vision for our sexuality, how sexuality should not lead to shame, should not lead to guilt, but is a beautiful celebration of the love and intimacy that is within a marriage. Today, we're going to see there's trouble in paradise. In fact, it dawned on me just a moment ago, our story arc is the same thing as all those romantic comedy movies you've seen. The couple gets together, they're enjoying each other, they're celebrating, but now there's a breakdown in the relationship. I want you to see this. If you have your Bibles, open them up to the Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon. It's just past Proverbs. You'll find it right after there. It'll be on the screen too in just a moment. The Song of Songs. are a happy couple at this point. They're married, they're celebrating, they are settling down to life, so to speak, and they're trying to keep the love afresh. Song of Songs, we're going to look at chapter 5, and we're going to start reading at verse 2. Chapter 5, verse 2. She is speaking here. She says, I slept, but my heart was awake. Listen, my beloved is knocking. Open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. My head is drenched with dew, my hair with the dampness of the night. I have taken off my robe. Must I put it on again? I have washed my feet. Must I soil them again? My beloved thrust his hand through the latch opening, and my heart began to pound for him. I arose to open for my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with flowing myrrh on the handles of the bolt. I opened for my beloved, but my beloved had left. He was gone. My heart sank at his departure. I looked for him, but did not find him. I called him, but he did not answer. The watchmen found me as they made their rounds in the city. They beat me, they bruised me, they took away my cloak, those watchmen of the walls. Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, if you find my beloved, what will you tell him? Tell him that I am faint with love. Now look in this passage, look what we see. She says she was asleep, but her heart was awake because her beloved's knocking at the door. Now, when he says his head is drenched with dew, his hair with the dampness of the night, he's been out working. He's been out working in the fields. He's been out doing whatever his business happens to be. And in the ancient world, which is still true in some cultures in our world today, most notably, especially with marriages with families that were well-to-do, the husband and wife did not share a room. He had her room, she had hers. And so he comes and he's knocking on the door, and he's wanting to reignite the passion of the marriage. We'll put it that way. He's seeking intimacy with his wife. And she responds with, I'm already in bed. Do I have to get up? Do I have to come to the door to let him in? This is the ancient world equivalent of something like, I've got a headache, babe. Maybe tomorrow. And so then her heart begins to pound, and she's, my beloved, he's radiant, he's ready, he's all the things that we had read about last week. And so she goes to the door to let him in, and he gone. And then she starts to experience all the pain that comes with having conflict with your beloved. She pictures it as if these watchmen were beating her and bruising her and robbing her of her cloak. Early on in this story, when she talked about the watchmen, they helped her find her beloved. But now, when she and her beloved are having conflict, they're having a fight, this picture of the watchman is not one of help, but is one of pain upon pain upon pain. Tell him that I am faint with love. Notice how in this picture, how we can relate to it so much, not just in our marriages, but in our relationships. Each person is focused on what they desire. He desired connection. She desired a good night's sleep. And since they couldn't come to an agreement, they depart from each other. Whenever we come to our relationship, whenever we come into our marriage, and if we're focused on our desires above all else, our desires above what our spouse wants, above what they might desire, we're leaving room, we're planting seeds for conflict to grow. When we come in focused on me, myself, and I, all that leads is to conflict after conflict. So how then do we navigate conflict well? What's the secret for navigating conflict within marriage well? Well, the secret isn't pretend your hopes and dreams don't exist. The secret isn't give your spouse a box of expectations and demands and God help them if they don't fulfill them. The secret is something totally different. The secret is found in one short little sentence that is one of the most powerful sentences in all the English language. It goes like this. It's not about me. It's not about me. Now keep this up there. This applies beautifully to our marriages. My marriage, it's not about me. Your marriages, they're not about you. This applies to our friendships. Our friendships, it's not about me. If you have children, the way you raise them, the way you parent them, it's not about me. At work, it's not about me. At church, it's not about me. Whatever social setting you find yourself in, we have this powerful, short little sentence. It's not about me. Do you know if the husband and the wife are committed to this sentence right here, it's not about me? Do you know how often they have knockdown, drag-out fights? I'm sure they happen. Very rarely. And when they do argue, when they do have conflict, their conflict isn't focused on me, myself, and I. The conflict that they're having is who gets to serve the other person today. You see, in a Christian marriage, a marriage that's sold out for Christ, it looks fundamentally different than a marriage based on anything else. Because in a marriage based on following Jesus, that marriage is based on a race to the end of the line. That marriage is based on an argument over who gets to wash the other's feet today. That marriage is based on who gets to serve the other person and who is going to be served today. A Christian marriage, it's based on a race to the end of the line. Paul tells us in Romans chapter 12, I want to say, when he talks about living together within the church, he makes this statement, but it's so applicable to our marriages as well. He says, outdo one another in showing honor. If you want to compete with your spouse, compete in this. Outdo them in showing honor to the other person. Now that's a radical marriage right there. How in the world do we put "it's not about me" into practice? Well, there's a couple short little verses in the New Testament that I think really show us what this looks like in practice. They come from one of Jesus' closest followers, a man named Peter. Now, Peter, he would eventually become the leader of the church. He would eventually become the leader of the apostles, the leader of the disciples. Peter would eventually become the leader of the church in Rome and ultimately martyred in Rome for his faith, probably by Nero. Peter would eventually become all of those things. But when Jesus found him, he was something totally different. When Jesus found Peter, we'll just say he was a hothead. He was quick to anger. He was quick to a fight. He was quick to draw his sword and to cut off someone's ear if they stood against Jesus. Peter was quick, brazen, and bold to stand up for Jesus. And Peter shows us all too often what all that brazenness is a cover for. Because when Peter was challenged by a little girl, a servant girl, "Hey, do you know Jesus?" Peter, in all of his boldness and all his brazenness and all of his hot-headedness, said, "No, I don't know that man." So often when we live lives of brazenness, of this mask that we put on that says we don't care what other people think, so often that just simply hides cowardice within us. It hides insecurity. This was Peter. Now, Peter, when he became all those other things, the leader of the church in Rome, he teaches us. And he says, and remember, this is coming from a person that was eager for a fight. Listen to how he says we should conduct ourselves. He says, "All of you, clothe yourselves with humility toward one another." Pause there. Take humility like a robe, like a jacket. Put it on. What does humility look like? Humility looks like it's not about me. Humility looks like racing to the end of the line. Humility looks like my heart is set on serving this person. How can I do that today? Humility looks like waking up in the morning and praying something like this: Jesus, how can I join you in loving my wife or my husband today? Peter says, clothe yourself with humility. Now, he doesn't just say this randomly. He then includes a very important word: because. There's a reason here. Peter is going somewhere. Clothe yourselves with humility because. And then he quotes a verse from the Old Testament that makes you go, whew. God opposes the proud, but shows favor, shows grace to the humble. Peter is saying, clothe yourselves with humility. What's the opposite of humility? This unholy, toxic pride that we talked about earlier. When we walk in pride, God opposes us. It's not as if God stands back and says, well, I'll just let them experience that, and then maybe they'll figure it out. When it says God opposes us, that means he steps in the midst of it, and he stands against the person that is living out of pride. Anytime we approach a conflict in our marriage focused on me, myself, and I, guess who we're standing against? The Lord of the universe. Anytime we approach conflict in our marriages and our relationships, if we're dating, if we're talking about our friendships, whatever that looks like, and if we're focused on, I'm going to get mine and don't you get in the way, God himself steps in. And he says, no. The way we walk with God in our marriages, we clothe ourselves with humility. It's not about me. Now, I have to say that out loud to myself, to remind myself it's not about me. Because every natural inclination we have goes against that. And why is this so important? I don't want to stand up to God. I don't want to be the one that goes up to God and says, I'm trying to do something, move. If you find yourself doing that, it won't go well for you. You understand. So how do we walk in humility then? What do I do with all my unfulfilled hopes and dreams if I'm not supposed to give them to my spouse, if I'm not supposed to do whatever I can to fulfill them, if my spouse gets in the way, get them out of the way? What do I do with them? Show next. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand. Instead of having our hands in a posture like this, where we're ready for a fight, we put ourselves under God's mighty hand. Something just as a random tidbit. If you find yourself having an argument with your spouse, your child, your whomever, consciously think of this. The mind and the heart are connected to the body. Take your hands and just put them like this. Continue talking, continue doing whatever it is you're doing, but open your hands and put them palms up. Now, why do we do that? If we're in an argument, if things aren't going our way, we naturally take our fists and we clench them like this. Or we pull out what could often be viewed as a 10-foot long finger and point it right at that other person. Do you know how hard it is to be angry with someone if we have an open posture? It just reminds us, hey, we're not in a fight. We're on the same team. We're going to get through this together. We want to come under the Lord's mighty hand. Why? Because then he places us within his hand, that he may lift you up in due time. How does the Lord lift us up? He puts us within his hand, and then he can lift us up. If we're not working against the Lord, if we're not operating out of pride, out of this toxic pride that's focused on me, myself, and I, we're giving space for the Lord to place us within his hand and then to lift us up. Now, you might still be thinking, that's all well and good, Pastor. What do I do with my hopes and dreams? Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Don't cast your anxiety on your spouse. Don't cast all your unfulfilled longings on your spouse. Before you talk about it with them, and you should talk about it, talking is healthy, but before you go to them, make sure you go to him. Cast all your anxiety on the Lord. We pray. Now, if you've ever prayed a prayer like this, you know it. Because a prayer like this, it doesn't sound like, "Oh, Heavenly Father, King of kings and Lord of lords, thou who lovest me more than anything." It doesn't sound like that. An honest prayer, when we're full of anxiety, when we're full of anger, because our hopes and our dreams are feeling unfulfilled, an honest prayer sounds totally different. It sounds like, "God, where are you?" If we feel like we're banging our head against the wall with the spouse that we have, an honest prayer sounds something like, "Lord, would you get them? I can't handle it anymore. I need you to do it." You know, you can love someone and still pray that. That's okay. An honest prayer of what it means to cast our anxiety on the Lord. And God, I had all these ideas of what life would look like, and it's not. Would you do something with this? Before we go to that other person, we go to the Lord in prayer, and we cast our anxiety on him. Then we're able to speak with our spouse and navigate conflict well. Now, as an interesting little part of this series that we're having, you've noticed that we've invited different couples to speak from various points, various seasons of life, different years of marriage. First, we had Jacques and Michaela, right? Well, there's Michaela. Jacques ran away. Oh, no, he's in the AV booth. They've been married for a year now, I think. Has it been a year? Did you have your anniversary? Oh, in July. All right, in a couple of weeks, it'll be their anniversary. Mark your calendars. Last week, my wife and I, our anniversary's in July as well. It'll be 17 years, which is exciting. Today, I want to invite up Steve and Julie Bowrichter. Come on up here. Let's give them a clap. Now, y'all told me how long you've been married, but I forgot. How long's that been?
52 years. So when Michael asked us to do this, he actually asked Julia to do it, and she came to me and said, you said, "You do it." And so that's because we know I'm the talker in the relationship. And no, not really. You notice we're starting to dress alike. We've been married so long, but I'm gonna ask her some questions to kind of set the stage for what we went through in some of the early years of our marriage to get us to the point we are now, whatever that point is. 52 going on 53. Okay, so we met in what year?
1968.
And we got married when?
1972.
And we had our first child, Russ, when?
1978.
So that meant 6 years of pure wedded bliss before we started having kids, right? No. There were some problems we had to work through initially because, you know, we had kind of a long distance romance. I was from Missouri, she was from Texas, and